Mother wolf with hungry cubs begs this veteran's baby to be let into their mountain home. The connection that formed between them left everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you love heartwarming wildlife stories that change lives forever. The first heavy snowfall of winter had transformed the rugged Montana landscape into a pristine wonderland. Nestled on the edge of the Bitterroot National Forest, the log cabin, owned by Jack Mercer, stood as a solitary beacon of warmth against the encroaching darkness. Inside, Jack gently rocked his 6-month-old daughter Zoe in his arms, her tiny fingers wrapped around one of his as he hummed a lullaby his mother had sung to him decades ago. Through the frost-edged windows, the snowfall had intensified, thick, flakes swirling hypnotically in the beam of the porch light. "She's finally asleep," Jack whispered as his wife Serena entered the living room, carrying 2 steaming mugs of herbal tea. Serena's dark hair was pulled back in a loose ponytail, her face bearing the subtle marks of exhaustion that came with new parenthood. Yet her eyes remained alert and observant, habits formed during her years as a wildlife biologist specializing in apex predators of the Northern Rockies. "The storm's getting worse," Serena said, setting the mugs down on the reclaimed wood coffee table and moving to the window. "The radio said we might get 3 feet by morning." She pressed her palm against the cold glass, feeling the vibration of the wind that pushed against their isolated home. "I'm glad we stocked up yesterday." Jack carefully placed Zoe in her bassinet near the crackling fireplace, adjusting the handmade quilt around her tiny form. "I should check the generator before." "It gets too late," he said, reaching for his prosthetic leg that rested against the couch. The carbon fiber and titanium limb had become just another part of him in the 4 years since he'd returned from Afghanistan, though the phantom pain still visited on cold nights like this one. Serena watched as her husband attached his prosthetic with practiced movements. Even after all this time, her heart ached at the sight of the scars that mapped his sacrifice. Jack had never wanted pity, and she'd never offered it, instead giving him respect, partnership, and eventually love, as they'd built this life together in the wilderness. "Be careful out there," she said, helping him into his heavy coat. It feels strange tonight." Jack smiled at his wife's intuition, something he'd learned to trust during their 3 years of marriage. As a former Force Recon Marine, he'd developed a similar sixth sense for danger, one that had saved his life more times than he could count during his deployments. "I'll just be a few minutes," he promised, kissing her forehead before reaching for the rifle they kept mounted beside the door, a precaution that came with living in mountain lion and bear country. As Jack opened the door, the bitter cold rushed in like an unwelcome guest, bringing with it the perfect silence that often accompanied heavy snowfall. He paused on the threshold, his trained senses immediately alert. The normal sounds of the forest, the distant hooting of owls, the rustle of pine branches, the occasional call of nocturnal creatures were completely absent. In their place was an unnatural stillness that raised the hairs on the back of his neck. "Do you hear that?" he asked, voice dropping to a near whisper. Serena moved to his side, her body tensing as she too registered the abnormal silence. "Hear? What? There's nothing?" "Exactly," Jack said, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. "Nothing at all." They both knew what this silence often signaled in the wilderness. Predators were nearby, large ones, the kind that other animals sensed and fell silent to avoid detection. Jack tightened his grip on the rifle, scanning the tree line that bordered their property. The thick curtain of snow limited visibility to just a few yards. The forest beyond transformed into shadowy, indistinct shapes. "Maybe I should wait until morning to check the generator," he conceded, about to close the door when a sound cut through the silence. Not the howl of the wind or the creak of snow-laden branches, but something alive, Something in distress. A soft, pained whimper floated through the darkness, followed by what sounded like nails scratching against wood, not at their front door, but around the side of the cabin where Jack's workshop stood. The sound came again, more insistent this time, accompanied by a low, rumbling growl that was unmistakably canine. "Wolves," Serena breathed. Her professional interest immediately peaked, despite the potential danger. But they never come this close to human habitations, not unless... Her words were cut short by a heavy thud against the side of the cabin, powerful enough to rattle the windows. Zoe stirred in her bassinet, but didn't wake, her tiny face scrunching momentarily before relaxing back into peaceful sleep. The thud came again, followed by that same whimper, a sound that somehow conveyed desperation as clearly as any human plea. Jack and Serena exchanged worried glances, both recognizing that whatever was out there wasn't behaving according to normal wildlife patterns. "I'm going to look," Serena decided, grabbing her coat from the hook by the door. Before Jack could protest, she added, "You stay with Zoe. If it's what I think it is, I'm better equipped to handle it." Jack wanted to argue, but he knew she was right. Despite his military training, Serena was the expert when it came to predator behavior. He nodded reluctantly, moving back to stand protectively near their daughter's bassinet. "Take the rifle," he insisted, handing it to her, "and the flare gun from the drawer. Be careful, sir." Serena checked that the rifle was loaded, but kept the safety on. She slipped the flare gun into her pocket and zipped up her coat, pulling a headlamp over her dark hair. With one last reassuring nod to Jack, she opened the door and stepped out into the swirling snow. The cold hit her like a physical blow, the wind driving icy particles against her exposed face. She switched on the headlamp, its beam creating a tunnel of visibility through the white haze. Moving carefully along the wraparound porch, she followed the sounds that had now evolved into a rhythmic scratching, interspersed with those pained whimpers. As she rounded the corner to the workshop side of the cabin, her light caught a reflection. Two glowing eyes staring back at her from about 15 yards away. They were positioned too high off the ground to be a fox or coyote. The distinctly amber glow confirmed what her ears had already told her. Wolf, but not just any wolf. As her light steadied, Serena's breath caught in her throat. Standing in the deep snow, its thick gray and white coat dusted with fresh powder, was one of the largest female wolves she had ever seen. The animal's sides heaved with exertion, steam rising from its muzzle with each panting breath. Blood matted the fur on its right shoulder, a dark stain spreading outward from what appeared to be a bullet wound. A hunter, Serena whispered to herself, anger flashing through her. Wolf hunting season had ended weeks ago. Anyone shooting wolves now was doing so illegally. The wolf didn't retreat from the light or show aggression. Instead, it took a tentative step forward, then another, its movements hampered by obvious pain. That's when Serena noticed something. Partially hidden behind the injured female were smaller shapes huddled in the snow. Cubs. At least 3 of them, their small bodies shivering visibly in the cold. Serena's scientific mind raced through the implications. Wolf cubs born in spring should be nearly adult-sized by December, yet these appeared much smaller, perhaps from a late summer litter. Unusual, but not unheard of, especially with climate change disrupting normal breeding cycles. They would be too young to survive winter without their mother, too inexperienced to hunt effectively on their own. The workshop door rattled again as another wolf, smaller than the first, but still an adult female, pressed against it, leaving smears of blood on the wood. This one had a visibly mangled paw, the kind of injury that often resulted from illegal steel traps. Behind her cowered 2 more cubs, even smaller than the first group, their thin bodies obviously malnourished. Understanding dawned on Serena. With stunning clarity, These weren't just random wolves driven by hunger to a human dwelling. These were two injured mothers with vulnerable cubs, desperately seeking shelter from both the killing storm and human hunters who pursued them out of season. Somehow, they had chosen this specific cabin, perhaps guided by instinct to the one human structure in the area, inhabited by someone who might understand their plight. "Jack!" Serena called, unable to take her eyes off the scene before her. "Jack, you need to see this." The door opened behind her and Jack appeared, having secured Zoe in her crib. He stopped short at the sight of the wolves, his military training immediately assessing the threat level. "Jesus Christ," he breathed, moving to Serena's side. "Are they rabid? Why would they come so close?" "They're injured," Serena explained quietly, gesturing toward the blood visible on both adult females. "Bullet wound on the larger one, trap injury on the smaller. They've got cubs, Jack. Young ones that shouldn't be out in this storm." As if understanding her words, the larger female wolf took another step forward, then did something that defied everything Serena knew about wild wolf behavior. The animal lowered its massive head, almost a bow, and then deliberately pushed one of her cubs forward with her nose. The small wolf tumbled awkwardly through the deep snow, coming to rest just a few feet from the humans. Rather than rushing to retrieve her vulnerable offspring, the mother wolf remained where she was, her amber eyes fixed intently on Serena's face. "She's asking for help," Serena whispered, awe evident in her voice. "Jack, she's deliberately showing us her baby." The cub at their feet was the smallest of the group, its thin frame racked with shivers, one eye crusted shut with infection. It couldn't be more than 4 months old, and it was clearly dying from hunger, cold, or both. Jack stared in disbelief, his years in combat having shown him the lengths to which mothers would go to protect their children in war-torn villages. He recognized the desperation in the wolf's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in human mothers begging him to save their children. It transcended species, that primal maternal need to protect at all costs. "This is crazy," he said, though his voice had softened. "Wolves don't behave like this. They're wild animals, predators. They're mothers," Serena countered, carefully kneeling to examine the cub without touching it. "And they're intelligent enough to know their cubs won't survive the night without help." She looked up at her husband, determination setting her features. "We can't turn them away, Jack, not when they came specifically asking for help." At that moment, the cub at their feet let out a pitiful whine, so weak it was barely audible above the howling wind. Inside the cabin, as if in response, baby Zoe's cries suddenly filled the night air, the sound carrying through the partially open door and out into the snowy darkness. What happened next would forever change how Jack and Serena understood the intelligence of the creatures with whom they shared these mountains. At the sound of the human baby's cries, the mother wolf's ears perked up simultaneously. The larger female tilted her head, listening intently, and then let out a soft, gentle howl, a sound that eerily echoed the pitch and cadence of Zoe's cries. It was a moment of connection that transcended scientific explanation. A human infant and wolf cubs, both vulnerable, both dependent on their parents' protection, two species separated by millennia of evolution, yet in this moment, united by the most fundamental bond in nature, the desperate love of mothers for their young. "The workshop," Jack said finally, making a decision. "It's insulated, empty except for tools. They could shelter there until the storm passes and we can get help." Serena nodded gratefully, already formulating a plan. "They'll need water, food. I have medical supplies in my research kit. The cub with the eye infection needs antibiotics, and the mother's wounds need cleaning." As they spoke, a distant crack echoed through the forest, the unmistakable sound of a rifle shot, followed by another. The wolves flinched collectively, the mothers immediately positioning themselves protectively around their cubs. The hunters were getting closer, "Hurry," Jack urged, already moving toward the workshop door with his keys. "Get them inside before those bastards get any closer." In that moment, with the snow falling in thick curtains around them and injured wolves seeking sanctuary at their doorstep, neither Jack nor Serena could have predicted how this night would unfold, or how it would lead to a discovery that would challenge everything science thought it knew about wolf intelligence, communication, and the complex emotional lives of the creatures with whom humans shared the wild places of the world. Jack unlocked the workshop door with hands numbed by cold and adrenaline. The spacious outbuilding had originally been constructed as a rehabilitation space for his physical therapy after returning from Afghanistan, before eventually becoming his woodworking sanctuary. Wood shavings still dusted the concrete floor. From his latest project, a rocking chair for Zoe he'd been crafting for her first birthday. "Over here," he called to Serena, clearing a large area in the corner furthest from the entrance. He swiftly gathered drop cloths and old blankets from storage shelves, arranging them into makeshift bedding. The workshop was unheated, but insulated. Walls kept it significantly warmer than the brutal outdoor conditions. A small wood stove sat against one wall, unused since the fall. "I'll get it started," Jack said, nodding toward the stove while Serena hurried back to the house for medical supplies. He loaded kindling and logs, his movements efficient despite the phantom pain that always intensified in extreme cold. Within minutes, a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows across the workshop's interior. Outside, the mother wolves hadn't moved, seemingly frozen in indecision as they watched the humans prepare the space. The distance between wild and domesticated worlds stretched between them like an invisible barrier, one that had kept their species separate and often in conflict for millennia. Serena returned with a large plastic container of medical supplies, a gallon jug of water, and several packages wrapped in butcher paper. "Venison from last season," she explained, setting everything on Jack's workbench. "I think they'll need protein more than anything." She approached the workshop entrance, keeping her movements slow and deliberate as she faced the wary wolves. Despite her years studying predators, she'd never attempted anything like this before. Wild wolves weren't supposed to seek human help. They weren't supposed to understand the concept of sanctuary or demonstrate this level of trust. Everything about this scenario defied established scientific understanding of wolf behavior. "It's okay," she said softly, kneeling just inside the doorway, making herself smaller and less threatening. "We want to help you." The larger female wolf, the one with the bullet wound, took a hesitant step forward, then another. She stopped just shy of the threshold, nostrils flaring as she scented the unfamiliar space. Behind her, her cubs whimpered, pressing against each other for warmth. A gust of wind drove needle-sharp ice crystals through the air, causing the wolves to flinch. Another distant gunshot echoed through the forest, closer than before. The decision was made for them in that moment. Danger behind, unknown ahead, but at least the unknown offered shelter from the killing storm and approaching hunters. Meso, injured mother wolf, limped across the threshold, her movements stiff with pain and caution. Once inside, she turned and made a soft chuffing sound to her cubs. The small wolves followed, stumbling on legs too thin for their bodies. The second mother, the one with the injured paw, hesitated longer, her body language broadcasting fear and suspicion. Only when her cubs began shivering violently did she finally enter, keeping her body between her young and the humans at all times. Jack closed the door behind them, careful not to make sudden movements. "What now?" he whispered to Serena, eyeing the wild predators that were now sharing the confined space of his workshop. In Afghanistan, he'd faced enemy fire without flinching. But this, wild wolves seeking refuge, was beyond anything his combat training had prepared him for. "First, we need to treat their wounds," Serena responded, keeping her voice steady and calm. The mothers won't let us near them or their cubs unless they're absolutely certain we mean no harm. She unwrapped one of the venison packages and placed it halfway between themselves and the wolves. The scent of meat filled the workshop immediately. The cubs perked up, noses twitching, but the mothers held them back with soft growls. The larger female approached the offering cautiously, sniffed it thoroughly, then grabbed the meat and carried it back to the cubs. Only after the young had eaten did the mothers take small portions for themselves. They're starving, but feeding. Their young first, Jack observed, a new respect entering his voice. Just like human parents would. Serena nodded. Wolf packs have complex social structures and strict feeding hierarchies. Cubs are always prioritized, especially when food is scarce. She opened another package of venison, placing it closer to the wolves this time. Their normal prey, deer, elk, small mammals, must be scarce for them to be this desperate. The illegal hunting has probably disrupted their natural hunting patterns. As the wolves cautiously consumed the second offering, Serena prepared antiseptic, antibiotics, and bandages. The big challenge will be treating them, she said quietly. Wild wolves don't exactly line up for medical attention. Jack watched. The mothers guard their feeding cubs, his military mind analyzing the situation with tactical precision. We need to establish trust first. Small steps. The food is working. What next? Water, Serena decided, filling a shallow basin from the gallon jug. She placed it near the venison wrapper, then retreated back to Jack's side. The smaller mother wolf approached first, this time, her injured paw held gingerly above the ground. She lapped thirstily at the water, then stepped aside as her cubs crowded forward to drink. The larger female followed, each movement clearly causing her pain from the bullet wound in her shoulder. She needs antibiotics immediately, Serena murmured, watching blood seep from the wound. Infection has already set in. If that bullet fragmented inside her, before she could finish, a beam of light swept across the workshop window. Jack immediately moved to extinguish the lantern, plunging the room into darkness except for the orange glow from the wood stove. The wolves tensed collectively, the mothers gathering their cubs behind them with practiced efficiency. Hunters, Jack whispered, the recognition immediate. He'd spent enough time in the backcountry to recognize the distinctive sweep of high-powered flashlights carried by people tracking prey at night. They must have followed the wolves' trail through the snow. The light passed again, closer this time, accompanied by the low rumble of voices. The wolves pressed themselves against the far wall, the mothers positioning their bodies to shield their cubs. The larger female's eyes reflected the firelight, her gaze fixed on the humans. Not with aggression, but with something Jack recognized from his time in combat zones. Desperate trust placed in strangers when all other options had failed. We need to get rid of them, Serena said, her voice hardening, before they spot signs that the wolves came here. Jack nodded, already reaching for his coat. Stay with them. I'll handle this. Jack, Serena caught his arm, concern etched across her features. Be careful. People hunting illegally aren't usually concerned with following other laws either. He squeezed her hand reassuringly, the military calm he'd developed in combat situations settling over him. I've dealt with worse. He checked that his sidearm was secure in its holster beneath his coat, a precaution he hadn't needed since leaving active duty, but one he was suddenly grateful for. With one last glance at the wolves huddled in the corner of his workshop, Jack slipped outside into the storm. The bitter cold hit him like a physical blow, the wind driving ice particles against his face with enough force to sting. He moved through the deep snow with practiced silence, his prosthetic leg causing only minor difficulty in the uneven terrain. The hunter's lights bobbed through the trees about 50 yards from the cabin's perimeter. Two figures, moving slowly, along what must have been the wolves' trail before the fresh snowfall began obscuring it. Jack circled wide, approaching from an angle that would conceal his origin point at the cabin. "Evening," he called out when he was within earshot, his voice carrying the authoritative edge he'd developed as a Marine officer. The hunters startled, swinging their rifles toward the sound before identifying a human silhouette. Jack kept his hands visible but maintained his distance, sizing up the trespassers. They were dressed in expensive hunting gear, their equipment top of the line. Not local subsistence hunters, but sport hunters with money. The taller one lowered his rifle slightly but kept it ready. "You live around here?" he called back, suspicion evident in his tone. Jack gestured vaguely toward the direction of the main road, away from his actual cabin. "Few miles that way. Heard shooting. Wolf season ended 6 weeks ago." He delivered the last statement bluntly, making it clear he knew exactly what they were doing. The shorter hunter stepped forward, his breath fogging in the frigid air. "Saw a pack moving through earlier, big female leading them. Wolves are overpopulated in these parts, just doing the elk herds a favor." "On private property," Jack responded, his voice hardening, "and conservation land beyond that. Montana Fish and Wildlife might have a different perspective on your community service." The taller hunter muttered something to his companion, his posture stiffening with hostility. "Look, buddy, we're just following a blood trail. Shot one earlier, but lost it in this storm. Don't want a wounded predator roaming around. That's dangerous for everyone." "Nothing more dangerous than wounded predators," Jack agreed, subtly shifting his stance to one that conveyed he was not a man to be trifled with. "Which is why hunting them out of season is illegal. I'd suggest you clear out before this storm gets worse and makes the roads impassable. Game wardens do regular patrols through here, even in bad weather." A tense silence stretched between them, broken only by the howling wind. The hunters exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the shorter one nodded reluctantly. "Trail's going cold anyway with this snow. Not worth getting stuck out here all night." "Smart decision," Jack said, maintaining his position as they began retreating toward what he now noticed was an expensive ATV partially concealed among the trees. He watched as they stowed their gear, his body tense and ready until the engine roared to life and the vehicle began moving away from the property. Only when the sound had faded completely did Jack turn back toward the cabin, trudging through snow that now reached midway up his shin. The storm was intensifying, the temperature dropping rapidly as night deepened. No one else would be foolish enough to be out in these conditions. The wolves would be safe for now. When Jack re-entered the workshop, he found Serena kneeling, just a few feet from the larger female wolf, speaking in soft, continuous tones as she held out her hand, palm up. The wolf was watching her intently, nostrils flaring as she processed Serena's scent. The cubs huddled behind their mothers, their thin bodies still trembling from cold and fear. "They're gone," Jack said quietly, closing the door against the howling wind. Heading back toward the main road, they won't risk getting stranded in this storm. Serena nodded, without taking her eyes off the injured wolf. "This is Luna," she said, using the gentle tone she normally reserved for speaking to Zoe. "And that's Willow." She nodded toward the smaller mother with the injured paw. "I've been talking to them, getting them used to my voice." Jack raised an eyebrow at the names but said nothing, recognizing his wife's methodology. Naming created connection. It was why military trainers discouraged soldiers from naming local animals in war zones. Once you named something, you cared about its fate. "Luna's shoulder needs immediate attention," Serena continued. "The wound is deep, and I'm worried about lead fragments. Willow's paw has a severe laceration from a trap, probably one of those illegal snares we've been finding in the conservation area." "Will they let you treat them?" Jack asked, hanging his coat and moving slowly toward the wood stove to add another log. Serena sighed. "I'm not sure. They're intelligent enough to know they need help, but their instincts are still telling them to avoid human contact. She reached for another piece of venison. We need to build more trust. As if understanding her words, Luna slowly stood and took a tentative step towards Serena. The massive wolf swayed slightly from weakness and blood loss, her breathing labored. She stopped just beyond arm's reach, then did something that left both humans speechless. She lowered herself to the ground, exposing her injured shoulder. Her amber eyes fixed on Serena with unmistakable intention. "My God," Jack whispered, witnessing behavior that contradicted everything known about wild wolf interactions with humans. "She's asking you to help her." Serena remained perfectly still, barely breathing. "Luna," she said softly, "I'm going to touch you now. It might hurt, but I'm trying to help." She slowly extended her hand, giving the wolf every opportunity to retreat or show aggression. Luna's muscles tensed as Serena's fingers made contact with her blood-matted fur, but she didn't pull away. The wolf's eyes closed briefly, a shudder running through her powerful body as Serena gently examined the wound. "The bullet's still in there," she reported, her scientific training taking over despite the extraordinary circumstances. "I can feel it just under the muscle. It hasn't hit anything vital, but it needs to come out before infection spreads." Jack watched in amazement as his wife began the delicate process of treating a fully conscious wild wolf. With gentle, confident movements, Serena cleaned the area around the wound, administered a local anesthetic, and prepared her instruments. Throughout the procedure, Luna remained still, occasionally making soft whimpering sounds, but never showing aggression. "You're being so brave," Serena murmured as she carefully extracted bullet fragments from the wound. "Such a good mother. Protecting your babies." From the corner, Willow watched intently, her injured paw still held above the ground. The cubs had settled somewhat, their exhaustion finally overwhelming their fear as they huddled together for warmth. "The little ones with the eye infection will need antibiotics," Serena said without looking up from her work. "And they're all severely malnourished. They must have been driven from their normal territory, probably by the illegal hunting." Jack moved closer, handing Serena clean gauze as she worked. "Do you think they were part of a larger pack?" "Almost certainly," Serena confirmed, dropping a misshapen bullet fragment into a metal dish. Wolf packs typically have complex family structures: alpha pair, previous year's offspring, and new cubs. Something catastrophic must have happened to fragment the pack this way. Two mothers with cubs from the same pack seeking help together. It's unprecedented behavior. As Serena finished cleaning and bandaging Luna's shoulder, the wolf's eyes remained fixed on her face, communicating something beyond what either human could fully comprehend. When the procedure was complete, Luna rose shakily to her feet, tested her weight on the injured leg, then did something that would forever change how Jack and Serena understood wolf intelligence. The massive wolf turned toward where her cubs lay watching, made a soft chuffing sound, then deliberately nudged the smallest one, the cub with the infected eye, forward toward Serena. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken in human language. "Help my baby too." Serena's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the wolf cub. Years of scientific training hadn't prepared her for this moment. Wild predators, voluntarily entrusting their young to human care, defied everything she'd been taught about animal behavior. The small wolf cowered initially, its tiny body quivering as Serena's fingers made contact with its matted fur. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, using the same soothing tone she employed with her daughter. "I just want to help you feel better." Luna watched intently, her amber eyes never leaving Serena's hands as the biologist carefully examined her cub. The infection had nearly sealed the young wolf's left eye shut, crusty discharge matting the fur around the socket. Without treatment, the infection would likely spread, potentially causing permanent blindness or worse. Jack moved to Serena's side, offering silent support as she worked. "What do you need?" he asked quietly, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. "Warm. Water, the antibiotic ointment, and those oral antibiotics in the blue bottle," Serena replied, gently cradling the cub in her lap. It was severely underweight, its ribs clearly visible beneath the dull grey and white coat. And more venison. They're all starving. As Jack gathered the supplies, Serena's scientific mind catalogued the anomalies before her. Wolf cubs born in spring should have been much larger by December, with thicker winter coats. These cubs appeared underdeveloped, possibly from malnutrition or because they were born exceptionally late in the season. "Late summer litter," she murmured almost to herself. "Unusual, but not unheard of. Climate change is disrupting normal breeding cycles. They never had a chance to build up reserves before winter." The cub squirmed weakly as Serena began cleaning the infected eye, but didn't attempt to bite or escape. Luna moved closer, watching the procedure with evident concern, occasionally making soft whimpering sounds that seemed to calm her offspring. "Almost done," Serena promised, applying antibiotic ointment with gentle precision. "This will help the infection, but we need to get some food and medicine into you." Jack returned with the requested supplies, plus additional venison which he offered to Willow and her cubs. The smaller mother wolf had remained more hesitant, keeping to the corner with her young ones, but hunger eventually overcame caution. She accepted the meat with delicate care, immediately sharing it with her cubs. "The social dynamics are fascinating," Serena whispered as she prepared a small dose of liquid antibiotics. Two mothers cooperating this way, sharing resources, seeking help together. Textbook wolf behavior would have the dominant female driving the other away, especially with food so scarce. "Maybe extreme circumstances change the rules," Jack suggested, watching as Luna gently nuzzled her cub while Serena administered the medicine. Like humans during disasters, normal social barriers break down when survival is at stake. The cubs swallowed the antibiotic mixture with surprising cooperation, perhaps too weak to resist. Serena rewarded it with small pieces of venison, which it consumed with desperate hunger. "We should name him," she decided, stroking the cub's head softly. Jack raised an eyebrow. "Getting attached already?" "Names help us connect," Serena explained, though she knew her husband understood the principle well. "How about Scout? He was brave enough to be the first." Luna made a soft sound, almost like approval, as she settled beside her cub. One by one, Serena examined each of the wolves, treating minor injuries, administering medicine where needed, and making mental notes of their conditions. Jack observed with growing amazement as the wild predators accepted human assistance with increasing trust, their initial fear gradually replaced by cautious acceptance. "This one's paw is badly infected," Serena reported, gently examining Willow's. "Injury. The trap had cut deeply into the pad, leaving a wound that had festered in the days since her escape. She needs antibiotics too, and the wound needs cleaning before I can bandage it." Willow tensed as Serena touched the injured paw, but didn't growl or pull away. Her eyes, a lighter gold than Luna's, held the same intelligent awareness, the understanding that this temporary discomfort was necessary for healing. "You've got military-grade medical supplies here," Jack commented, noting the prescription-strength antibiotics and specialized wound care items in Serena's kit. She smiled slightly without looking up from her work. "Wildlife research privileges. When you're treating injured predators in remote locations, you need the good stuff." Her expression grew more serious. "I just never expected to be using them this way." Outside, the storm had intensified, wind howling around the corners of the workshop like a living thing. The temperature had dropped further, turning the earlier snowfall into a dangerous ice storm. The wolves seemed to understand they had found sanctuary just in time. The conditions outside now would have meant certain death for the cubs. As Serena finished treating Willow's paw, applying a light bandage that the wolf would likely remove once the wound had begun healing properly, a soft cry came from the main cabin. Zoe had awakened, her plaintive calls carrying clearly through the baby monitor Jack had brought to the workshop. "I'll get her," Jack said, rising carefully to avoid startling the wolves. Luna's head lifted at the sound of the human baby's cries, her ears swiveling forward with evident interest. Serena watched, fascinated, as the mother wolf tilted her head, listening intently to Zoe's vocalizations. "She recognizes another baby in distress," Serena murmured, the scientist in her documenting every reaction. "The pitch of an infant's cry transcends species boundaries." Jack hesitated at the door. "Will you be okay alone with them?" Serena nodded, no longer feeling fear in the presence of the wolves. "We've established trust. Go take care of Zoe. Maybe bring her out here." The suggestion hung in the air, radical and potentially dangerous. Jack's protective instincts flared immediately. "Bring our 6-month-old daughter into a room with wild wolves?" "Sir, that's crazy, I know," Serena acknowledged. "But Jack, look at them. They've trusted us with their most vulnerable. There's something happening here that goes beyond normal wolf behavior. Something important. Jack's military training, warred with the extraordinary scene before him. Wild predators peacefully coexisting with humans, mothers seeking help for their young." After a long moment, he nodded reluctantly. "I'll bring her, but at the first sign of anything concerning, we'll take her back immediately," Serena promised. When Jack returned minutes later, he carried Zoe wrapped in her favorite blanket, the infant still fussing softly against his chest. The wolves immediately noticed the new arrival, their posture changing from relaxed to alert. Luna rose to her feet, nostrils flaring as she caught the baby's scent. "It's okay," Serena said softly, though whether she was reassuring the wolves or her husband wasn't clear. "She's our cub." Jack moved slowly, keeping his body between the wolves and his daughter as he settled onto a wooden stool near Serena. Zoe's cries had softened to gentle whimpers, her tiny hands grasping at her father's shirt as she sensed the tension in his body. Luna approached with careful deliberation, each step measured and non-threatening. She stopped several feet away, her amber eyes fixed on the bundle in Jack's arms. The workshop fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and Zoe's occasional soft sounds. The cubs watched from their corner, sensing something significant in their mother's behavior. Slowly, with the same deliberate movement she had used to present her cub for treatment, Luna lowered herself to the ground in front of Jack and Serena, her posture submissive and non-threatening. Then, to their astonishment, she released a soft, melodic howl. Not the full-throated call wolves used to communicate across distances, but a gentler, almost crooning sound that somehow mirrored Zoe's whimpers in tone and cadence. The baby, immediately quieted, her dark eyes widening as she turned toward the unfamiliar sound. For a breathtaking moment, human infant and wolf mother gazed at each other across the divide of species that had separated their kinds for millennia. "She's communicating with her," Serena whispered, scarcely daring to breathe lest she break the spell of the moment. "Jack, she's speaking to our baby." Zoe made a soft cooing sound, her small face brightening with that simple curiosity unique to infants who hadn't yet learned fear of the unfamiliar. Luna responded with another gentle vocalization, her tail moving in a slow, non-threatening sweep across the workshop floor. Jack's body remained tense, ready to move at the slightest sign of danger, but his expression had transformed from concern to wonder. "I've seen a lot of incredible things," he murmured, the combat veteran momentarily rendered speechless by the peaceful exchange before him. but nothing like this. The moment was interrupted by a sudden violent gust of wind that rattled the workshop windows, causing everyone, human and wolf, to startle. The storm outside had reached blizzard conditions, the temperature plummeting dangerously as Arctic air pushed through the mountain passes. Jack checked his watch, surprised, to find that several hours had passed since they had first discovered the wolves at their door. "It's past midnight," he noted, adjusting Zoe more comfortably in his arms. The baby had begun to doze, lulled perhaps by the warmth of the workshop and the unexpected lullaby from Luna. The storm's supposed to peak around dawn. Roads will be impassable until the county plows get through, probably late tomorrow. Serena nodded, her mind already working through what they would need for the night. "I'll need to get more supplies from the house. Food for all of us, water, extra blankets." She glanced at the wolves, who had settled back into their corner, the cubs now sleeping in exhausted heaps while the mothers remained vigilant. "They're safe for now, but we need a longer-term plan." "What kind of plan?" Jack asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "They need proper medical care, especially Willow's paw and Scout's eye, and they're all malnourished. They won't survive if we just send them back into the wild, especially with hunters still in the area." Serena's voice took on the determined tone Jack recognized from when she was advocating for wildlife protection measures. "I need to contact Dr. Harmon at the Wolf Conservation Center. He can arrange proper transportation once the roads are clear." Jack nodded slowly, knowing his wife was right. These wolves, having crossed the threshold between wild and human worlds, couldn't simply be released back into the forest. Not in their current condition, and not with the threat of illegal hunting still present. The Conservation Center is about 3 hours from here, right? Near Missoula? Yes. They have a rehabilitation facility specifically for wolves recovered from illegal hunting and trapping situations. Serena gently stroked Scout's head as the cub slept fitfully, his body occasionally twitching from dreams or lingering pain. They can provide proper care and eventually release them into protected areas where hunting is prohibited. And if these wolves have imprinted on humans after all this? Jack gestured to the extraordinary scene around them. Wild predators sleeping peacefully in a human structure, trusting people with their wounded and their young. Serena sighed, the scientist, in her acknowledging the complicated reality of their situation. That's the risk, but the alternative is worse. They die out there, Jack. If not from their injuries or starvation, then from the hunters who are clearly targeting them specifically. As if understanding their conversation, Luna lifted her head, her intelligent eyes moving between the humans. The wolf had positioned herself between her sleeping cubs and the workshop door, her body language making it clear she understood they were still in danger from forces outside their temporary sanctuary. "We'll need to document everything," Serena decided, reaching for her phone to take photos of the wolves' conditions and injuries. The bullet wound, the trap injuries, it's all evidence of illegal hunting activities. Fish and Wildlife needs to know what's happening in this area. Jack watched his wife shift into her professional role, the wildlife biologist emerging alongside the compassionate woman who had first welcomed the wolves into their sanctuary. He recognized the determination. In her eyes, the same look she'd had when they first met at a veteran rehabilitation center where she volunteered with therapy animals. She had approached his anger and pain with that same gentle persistence, eventually breaking through his post-combat isolation with her unwavering patience. "I'll get more supplies from the house," he offered, carefully rising with Zoe still sleeping in his arms. "Should I put her in her crib first?" Serena hesitated, glancing between their daughter and the wolves. After a moment's consideration, she reached for the baby. "I'll keep her with me. I think..." I think it's important they continue to understand she's our cub, that we're not so different after all. Jack handed Zoe to his wife, brushing a gentle kiss against the baby's forehead before heading toward the door. The scene he left behind stayed with him as he trudged through the deepening snow back to the main cabin, his wife cradling their infant daughter, while wild wolves watched with what could only be described as understanding. It was an image that defied everything he thought he knew about the natural order, about the boundaries between human and wild. In the Afghan villages, where he'd served, Jack had witnessed how quickly the artificial structures of civilization could fall away in the face of survival necessities. People who might otherwise be enemies would cooperate when confronting shared threats, flood, famine, or violence that endangered them all. Perhaps what they were witnessing with the wolves wasn't so different. Desperate circumstances creating unexpected alliances across boundaries that normally remained rigidly fixed. He gathered supplies methodically, more venison from the freezer, extra blankets, a camping stove for heating water, formula and diapers for Zoe. His military training made the task efficient despite his prosthetic leg, which ached from the cold and unusual activity of the evening. As he worked, he found himself listening for sounds from the workshop, hyper-aware that his wife and child were sharing space with wild predators. Yet something deeper than caution stirred within him, a sense that what was happening in that small outbuilding transcended the normal boundaries between species. The way Luna had lowered herself before Zoe, the gentle howl that had soothed his daughter, these weren't the actions of a mindless predator. There was intelligence there, and something more complex still. Something like empathy. When Jack returned to the workshop, arms laden with supplies, he found Serena sitting cross-legged on the floor, with Zoe asleep in her lap. Luna had moved closer, now lying just a few feet away, her amber eyes moving between the human mother and baby with evident interest. The wolf's cubs had awakened and were cautiously exploring their temporary sanctuary, their movements still hampered by weakness, but showing signs of improved energy after food and rest. "They're getting bolder," Serena reported softly as Jack set down the supplies. Still cautious, but their natural curiosity is emerging now that they feel safer. One of the smaller cubs, Jack guessed it belonged to Willow based on its coloring, had ventured closer to where Serena sat with Zoe. The young wolf froze when Jack entered, assessing this new development with wary eyes. "It's okay," Serena murmured to the cub. "He's family too." Jack distributed the supplies, setting up the camping stove to heat water for formula and coffee. The domesticity of the scene struck him as surreal, preparing his daughter's midnight feeding while wild wolves observed with intelligent interest. Beyond the workshop walls, the storm continued unabated, ice crystals driving against the windows with percussive force, the wind moaning through the trees like a living thing giving voice to the winter's fury. "We should try to get some sleep," he suggested, checking that the wood stove had enough fuel to last through the night. "Take shifts watching over everything." Serena nodded, carefully shifting Zoe to a more comfortable position. "You first. I want to monitor Scout and Willow a bit longer. The antibiotics should start working soon, but they'll need regular doses." Jack arranged blankets into a makeshift bed near the stove, creating a warm, safe space for Serena and Zoe. As he worked, he found himself under the steady gaze of Luna, the large wolf tracking his movements with unmistakable assessment. There was no aggression in her posture, merely watchful awareness, one protector recognizing another. "I think she understands you're protecting your family," Serena observed, noticing the exchange. Wolves have complex social structures built around family protection. In many ways, they're more like us than most people realize. Jack finished preparing Zoe's formula and handed the bottle to Serena, who began feeding their daughter with practiced ease. Maybe that's why humans and wolves formed the first domestication bond thousands of years ago, he mused, settling onto his stool, recognition of something familiar across the species barrier. Outside, the winter storm raged on, while inside the workshop, an ancient boundary between human and wild began to dissolve in ways that would eventually challenge scientific understanding and forever change how the Mercers understood their dawn. Arrived with eerie silence, the storm having exhausted itself during the night. The world outside the workshop windows had been transformed into a crystalline landscape, every branch and surface encased in ice that captured the first rays of morning sun. Jack awoke from his brief sleep, immediately alert to his surroundings. A habit formed during his military years that had never fully faded. Serena sat nearby, dozing upright with Zoe cradled securely in her arms. The wolves had rearranged themselves during the night, no longer huddled defensively in the corner, but spread throughout the workshop in what appeared to be strategic positions. Luna lay near the door, her head raised at Jack's movement, golden eyes instantly focused and aware. Willow had positioned herself close to the window, where she could monitor the outside world while still keeping her cubs within sight. The young wolves were showing marked improvement after just one night of care. Scout's infected eye had begun. To respond to the antibiotics, the swelling noticeably reduced. The cubs moved with greater energy, their thin bodies still desperately undernourished, but benefiting from the protein-rich venison and warm shelter. Jack carefully rose, mindful not to disturb Serena or the watchful wolves as he checked his phone. No signal. The ice storm had likely damaged the communication towers in their remote area. The satellite internet at the main cabin might still be functioning, but he would need to check. He added wood to the stove, bringing the temperature back up from the overnight chill. "Morning," Serena murmured, her eyes opening as the workshop warmed. "How long was I asleep?" "About 3 hours," Jack replied softly, moving to her side. "You needed it. How's our patient?" He gestured toward Scout, who had curled up against Luna's side. "Better than I expected," Serena admitted, carefully adjusting Zoe, who still slept peacefully. "The antibiotics are working quickly, and they all seem calmer this morning, more settled." Jack nodded, noting the changed atmosphere himself. The previous night had been charged with tension, wounded predators in an unfamiliar environment, humans uncertain about the boundaries of this unprecedented situation. This morning, something had shifted. A tentative trust had formed, bridging the ancient divide between their species. "I need to check the house, see if we have communications," Jack said, "and assess the damage from the storm. Those hunters might return once the road's clear." At the mention of hunters, Luna's ears flattened slightly, her body tensing as if she understood the word and its implications. Serena noticed the reaction with scientific interest. "Their comprehension is remarkable," she whispered. "I've worked with wolves for years, but I've never seen anything like this level of recognition, this understanding of human intention." Jack knelt beside his wife, gently taking Zoe from her arms to allow Serena to stretch and move. The baby stirred but didn't wake, her small face peaceful in sleep. "Maybe it's not just that they understand us," he suggested, cradling his daughter carefully. "Maybe it's that we're finally understanding them." Serena stood slowly, her muscles stiff. From the night spent in an awkward position, Luna watched this exchange with evident interest, her intelligent eyes tracking the movement of the human baby between parents. Willow remained at her post by the window, occasionally making soft sounds to her cubs that kept them from straying. "Too close to the humans. I'll go to the house," Jack decided, helping Serena settle back onto her makeshift seat. "You stay here, rest a bit more. I'll bring back breakfast for everyone." The temperature outside had risen just enough that the accumulated ice had begun to loosen its grip on the landscape. As Jack made his way to the main cabin, Occasional crystal sheets slid from pine branches, shattering on the ground with sounds. Like breaking glass, the forest seemed to be awakening from its frozen state, stretching and shifting in the morning light. The cabin stood undamaged, a testament to Jack's careful construction and preparation for Montana's harsh winters. Inside, he quickly checked the satellite internet connection. Still functioning, though sluggish, he composed a brief email to Dr. Harmon at the Wolf Conservation Center, attaching several of the photos Serena had taken of the wolves' injuries, and explaining their extraordinary situation. He emphasized the unusual behavior, knowing Harmon would understand the scientific significance of what they were witnessing. A second email went to the Montana Fish and Wildlife Service, reporting the illegal hunting activity with GPS coordinates of where they had encountered the hunters. Jack included descriptions of their vehicles and equipment, along with the bullet he had extracted from Luna's shoulder as evidence of out-of-season wolf hunting. As Jack prepared a simple breakfast of oatmeal, eggs, and coffee, his military training kept him constantly aware of his surroundings. He positioned himself to maintain line of sight to the workshop through the kitchen window, unable to fully relax with his wife and child sharing space with wild predators, regardless of how peacefully the night had passed. A movement at the tree line caught his attention. Not wolves this time, but a large bull moose pushing through the snow-laden branches, likely drawn to the relative shelter of the clearing around the cabin. The massive animal paused, scenting the air, then abruptly turned and disappeared back into the forest, moving with surprising speed for its size. Jack recognized the behavior immediately. Prey animals didn't move like that unless predators were nearby. Setting down the coffee pot, he retrieved his binoculars from the shelf by the door and scanned the forest edge. Nothing moved among the ice-covered trees, but instinct told him something had disturbed the moose. Something that made a massive 1,000-pound animal with lethal antlers decide retreat was its best option. He returned to preparing breakfast with heightened awareness, frequently checking the perimeter of their property through the windows. The satellite phone on the counter chirped, an incoming message. Dr. Harmon had responded already, expressing both scientific excitement and concern about their situation. Extraordinary behavior, the wildlife biologist had written. Unprecedented in documented wolf-human interactions. Keep detailed records of everything. Team preparing to depart once roads clear. Estimated arrival tomorrow morning earliest. Exercise. Extreme caution. Wolves seeking human help indicates severe distress and could be unpredictable. Would advise moving the cubs and mothers to separate structure from human infant, despite apparent peaceful interaction. Jack loaded the prepared food, fresh water, and additional medical supplies onto a small sled he normally used for hauling firewood. The warning from Harmon lingered in his mind as he made his way back to the workshop. His military training inclined to agree with the expert's assessment of risk. Yet what he had witnessed during the night, Luna's gentle communication with Zoe, the careful, almost deliberate way the mother wolves had arranged themselves protectively around both sets of young, suggested something beyond conventional understanding of wolf behavior. As Jack approached the workshop, he noticed fresh tracks in the snow, wolf tracks larger than those made by either Luna or Willow. These massive prints belonged to an adult male, circling the perimeter of the workshop before disappearing back into the forest. His hand moved instinctively to the sidearm concealed beneath his coat, scanning the tree line for any sign of the animal. Inside the workshop, Serena looked up with evident relief as Jack entered. "Did you see them?" she asked immediately. "See what?" Jack set down the sled, noting that all the wolves inside the workshop were now alert, their postures tense. "There are more wolves out there," Serena explained, moving to the window. "At least 2 adult males. They approached about 20 minutes ago, staying just within the tree line. Luna and Willow became extremely agitated." Jack described the tracks he had found and the moose's hasty retreat. Could be the rest of their pack, he suggested, distributing the breakfast supplies. Maybe searching for the missing mothers and cubs. That would make sense, Serena agreed, accepting a mug of coffee gratefully. Wolf packs maintain strong bonds. If these females went missing with their young, the others would search for them, especially in these harsh conditions. Luna had moved to the window, her posture communicating, tension rather than fear. She made a low sound in her throat, not quite a growl, but a vibrating hum that seemed directed toward the forest beyond. Willow joined her, their cubs remaining huddled together near the wood stove. They're communicating with the others, Serena observed, watching the interaction with fascination. Letting them know they're here, but not in distress. How can you tell? Jack asked, checking that the workshop door was securely closed. Their vocalizations are different from warning signals or distress calls. And look at their body language. Alert, but not defensive. Serena's scientific mind was fully engaged now, analyzing every aspect of the wolves' behavior. This is extraordinary, Jack. We're witnessing pack communication strategies that have never been documented before. Outside, a distant howl echoed through the frozen landscape, deep and resonant, unmistakably male. Luna responded immediately, her answering call softer but clear. The exchange continued for several minutes, a conversation across species boundaries that the humans could hear but not understand. They're coordinating something, Jack said, his tactical assessment skills engaging. The way military units communicate positions and strategies, Serena nodded, her expression thoughtful. Wolves have complex communication systems. They can convey specific information about prey locations, territory boundaries, threats, she glanced at Jack, and presumably about places of safety. The realization dawned simultaneously. Luna and Willow hadn't randomly stumbled upon their cabin during the storm. They had deliberately sought out this specific location, perhaps guided by previous observations of the humans who lived there. The mother wolves had made a calculated decision to approach people they had somehow identified as potential allies rather than threats. Dr. Harmon responded, Jack said, handing Serena his phone with the email displayed. He's sending a team. As soon as the road's clear, Serena read quickly, her expression shifting from excitement to concern. He wants us to separate the wolves from Zoe. It would be the conventional wisdom, Jack acknowledged, watching as Luna returned from the window, circling back to check on her cubs. But nothing about this situation is conventional. Zoe began to stir, making the soft sounds that signaled she was waking and would soon want her morning feeding. Luna's ears immediately swiveled toward the baby, her attention shifting from the outside world to the human infant with evident interest. I'll prepare her bottle, Jack said, moving toward the camping stove. To their surprise, Luna approached Serena and Zoe, moving with deliberate slowness, her body language non-threatening. The large wolf stopped a respectful distance away, then lowered herself to the floor, her amber eyes fixed on the baby with what could only be described as gentle curiosity. She's fascinated by Zoe, Serena whispered, adjusting her position so the baby was slightly more visible to the wolf. I've never seen anything like this level of interest in a human infant. Zoe's eyes opened fully, her gaze immediately finding Luna. Instead of fear or distress at the sight of the predator, the baby's face lit with a toothless smile of delight. She reached one tiny hand toward the wolf, making soft cooing sounds that seemed directed specifically at Luna. My God, Jack breathed, momentarily forgetting the bottle he was preparing. She recognizes her from last night. What happened next defied everything they thought they knew about wolf behavior. Luna inched forward, still maintaining a respectful distance, and made that same soft, melodic sound she had used the previous night. A gentle howl that somehow mimicked the cadence of Zoe's vocalizations. The baby responded with increased excitement, her small body wiggling with joy. She's communicating with her, Serena said, her scientific training struggling to categorize what she was witnessing. Not just reacting, not just curious. She's deliberately engaging with Zoe. Willow had returned to the window, her attention divided between the interaction inside and whatever was happening in the forest beyond. One of her cubs, the smallest, a female with distinctive silver markings on her face, cautiously approached where Serena sat with Zoe, following Luna's lead. "Should I?" Jack began, his protective instincts warring with the extraordinary scene unfolding before him. "Let's see what happens," Serena suggested, though she adjusted her hold on Zoe to ensure she could move quickly if necessary. "This is unprecedented behavior. We need to document everything." The wolf cub crept closer, its small body still thin from hardship, but moving with growing confidence. It stopped just beyond Serena's reach, dark eyes filled with the boundless curiosity. Of the young, Zoe spotted the cub, and her excitement intensified, small hands reaching toward this new and fascinating creature. Luna watched this interaction closely, her body relaxed, but watchful. A mother supervising her young one's explorations. She made another soft sound, which seemed to encourage her cub to continue the approach. "They're socializing," Serena whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "The mothers are deliberately introducing their young to each other. This contradicts everything we know about wild wolf behavior toward humans." Jack finished preparing Zoe's bottle and brought it to Serena, moving slowly to avoid disrupting the delicate interaction. As Serena began feeding their daughter, Luna's attention focused on this process with evident interest, her intelligent eyes tracking the bottle, the baby's eager response, the care with which Serena held her child. "She's learning from us," Jack realized, settling beside his family but maintaining awareness of the workshop's perimeter. "Studying how we care for our young. And we're learning from them," Serena added softly, watching as Luna returned to her cubs, gathering them close with gentle nuzzles and soft vocalizations. The parallels in parenting behaviors across species. It's remarkable. Outside, another howl sounded, closer this time, but still keeping distance from the human structures. Jack moved to the window, scanning the tree line until he spotted movement. A massive black wolf, significantly larger than either Luna or Willow, stood at the forest edge, his powerful body partially concealed by ice-laden branches. "Alpha male," Jack said quietly, recognizing the commanding presence of the wolf, even from a distance. "He's keeping watch." Serena joined him at the window, Zoe still feeding contentedly in her arms. "The pack is reuniting," she observed. "But they're being cautious. The males are maintaining a perimeter while the females and cubs recover in safety." "Military precision," Jack noted with professional appreciation. "Protecting their vulnerable members while assessing the situation." The black wolf remained visible for several minutes, his golden eyes seemingly fixed directly on the workshop, as if he could see through walls to where his pack members had taken refuge. Finally, with what appeared to be deliberate intent, he raised his massive head and gave a single, powerful howl before disappearing back into the forest. Luna and Willow exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Their postures relaxed subtly, tension easing from their bodies. "He's confirmed their safety," Serena interpreted, watching the mother's response. "Established a perimeter and communicated that they're secure for now." Jack nodded, his tactical mind understanding the strategy at play. "They're establishing a defensive position around our property. But why? They could simply collect Luna and Willow and the cubs and disappear back into the wilderness." Serena considered this question, her scientific training and intuition working. In tandem, I think they might be protecting us too, the hunters who injured Luna and Willow. If they return, they'd find wolves waiting for them. The pack is repaying the sanctuary we provided." The idea seemed fantastic, yet the evidence before them suggested precisely this level of complex reasoning and social reciprocity. The wolves were not simply accepting human aid in a moment of desperation. They were forming an alliance, extending protection in return for the care provided to their vulnerable members. As the morning progressed, Jack and Serena continued to treat the wolves' injuries, documenting every interaction with scientific precision. The cubs grew increasingly bold, venturing closer to the humans, especially Zoe, whose presence seemed to fascinate them. Luna and Willow supervised these interactions carefully, always alert but increasingly comfortable with the proximity of their young to the human child. Dr. Harmon won't believe this, Serena said, recording video of a particularly striking moment when Luna gently guided one of her cubs away when it became too enthusiastic in its approach to Zoe. This level of social awareness, this careful management of interspecies interaction, it contradicts everything we thought we knew about wild wolf behavior. Jack checked his watch, calculating the likely arrival time of the conservation team. Based on current road conditions, what will happen when they come? These wolves have chosen to trust us specifically. Will they extend that trust to strangers? Serena's expression grew troubled. I don't know. Conservation protocols would typically involve sedation, medical assessment, possible relocation to protected areas. She watched as Scout played with his siblings, his infected eye already showing significant improvement. But these aren't typical wolves, are they? The question hung in the air, unanswered. Outside, the sun climbed higher, beginning to melt. The ice that had transformed their mountain home into a crystalline fortress. Somewhere in the surrounding forest, male wolves maintained a protective perimeter, coordinating with the mothers who had sought human help in their moment of greatest need. Inside the workshop, an ancient boundary continued to dissolve, not erased completely, but made permeable by mutual midday, brought the first sounds of machinery in the distance. County snowplows clearing the main roads, the rumble of their engines carrying across the frozen landscape. Jack stood at the workshop window, calculating how long it would take before the rural access road to their property became passable. Dr. Harmon's team would likely arrive by early evening if the clearing operations continued at this pace. Serena sat cross-legged on the floor, laptop balanced on her knees, as she documented the morning's observations. The behavioral notes had grown into pages of detailed analysis, accompanied by dozens of photographs and video clips capturing interactions that defied conventional understanding of wolf behavior. I've started organizing everything chronologically, she told Jack, not looking up from her screen. First contact, initial treatment of injuries, feeding patterns, communication attempts, social behaviors with Zoe. Harmon's going to need all of this properly catalogued. Luna lay nearby, watching Serena work with evident interest, her intelligent eyes occasionally tracking to the screen as if understanding that her actions were being recorded. The large wolf had remained close to Zoe throughout the morning, her protective instincts seemingly extending to include the human infant in her sphere of care. Willow had finally allowed Serena to properly clean and rebandage her injured paw, the initial wariness giving way to cautious trust. The smaller wolf now kept watch from a position near the door, occasionally rising to check on her cubs, who had become more playful as their strength returned, tumbling and mock fighting with Luna's offspring in the center of the workshop. The road will be clear within a few hours, Jack noted, turning from the window. What's our plan when Harmon arrives? These wolves have formed a connection with us specifically. I'm not sure how they'll react to strangers entering their temporary sanctuary. Serena looked up from her documentation, her expression troubled. It's not just that. Look at them, Jack. They're not behaving like wild wolves anymore, at least not entirely. The level of trust they've established with us, with Zoe. She gestured toward where Luna had positioned herself protectively near the makeshift bed where the baby now napped. Standard wildlife protocols might not be appropriate here. Jack understood her concern. The connection forming between the wolves and their family transcended normal human-wildlife interactions. Luna and Willow weren't merely tolerating human presence while recovering from injuries. They were actively engaging, communicating, integrating themselves into the human social structure. "Harmon's a reasonable man," Jack said, though uncertainty tinged his voice. "Once he sees the evidence, the behavior patterns you've documented, surely he'll recognize this is something unique." Serena's response was interrupted by a sudden change in the wolves' demeanor. Luna rose to her feet, her posture instantly alert, eyes fixed on the workshop door. Willow froze in place, ears swiveling toward some sound beyond human hearing range. The cubs immediately ceased their play, responding to their mother's tension by scurrying to shelter beneath the workbench. "Something's wrong," Jack said, his combat instincts engaging immediately. He moved to the window, scanning the property with experienced eyes. Nothing moved in the immediate vicinity, but a subtle shift in the forest's edge caught his attention. A flash of unnatural color among the ice-laden trees. Serena had joined him, keeping her voice low. "What is it?" "Not sure. But the pack. Males were patrolling earlier. If they've detected a threat..." Jack let the thought hang unfinished. He retrieved his rifle from where it rested against the wall, checking that it was loaded but keeping the safety engaged. "Stay here with Zoe and the wolves. I'll circle around, see what's got them spooked." Luna approached Jack as he prepared to leave, her amber eyes communicating something that transcended language barriers. She made a soft, rumbling sound deep in her throat. Not a growl of aggression, but something more complex, a warning perhaps, or a request for caution. "I'll be careful, girl," Jack found himself saying, as naturally as if addressing a trusted military working dog. The comparison wasn't entirely inappropriate. The intelligence in Luna's gaze, the alert awareness of her posture, reminded him of the highly trained canines that had saved countless lives during his deployments. Outside, the temperature had risen enough to begin melting the ice, creating a treacherous surface of slush over deeper snow. Jack moved with practiced stealth, despite his prosthetic leg, keeping to the tree shadows as he circled wide around the workshop. Years of combat training had taught him to move silently, even in difficult terrain, and those skills returned automatically, now that his family might be threatened. He caught scent before sight, the distinctive smell of vehicle exhaust drifting from the direction of their access road. The county plows shouldn't have reached their private drive yet, which meant someone was approaching on foot or by snowmobile. Jack dropped lower, using a fallen log as cover while he scanned the approach. Two figures emerged from the tree line nearly 400 yards away, moving carefully through the deep snow. Their clothing was winter camouflage, white and grey, patterns designed to blend with the snowy landscape. Both carried rifles, held ready but not aimed. Hunters, and from their cautious approach, not the legal kind who respected property boundaries and season restrictions. Jack recognized them immediately. The same men he'd confronted during the storm. They'd returned, likely seeking the wounded wolves they'd been tracking. His hand tightened on his rifle, though he kept it lowered. Confrontation would be a last resort, but he wouldn't allow these men to threaten either his family or the wolves that had sought sanctuary with them. A movement to his right drew Jack's attention. The massive black wolf he'd spotted earlier at the forest's edge was paralleling the hunter's approach, moving like a shadow through the trees. The animal's stealth was remarkable. Despite its size, it made virtually no sound as it navigated the melting snow, keeping downwind from the intruders. Two more wolves materialized on the opposite flank, younger males based on their size, their grey coats nearly invisible against the winter landscape. The pack had established a perimeter around the Mercer property, monitoring the approaching threat with military precision. Jack found himself impressed by their tactical awareness. They were coordinating their movements, maintaining visual contact with each other while remaining hidden from the hunters. He retreated silently, circling back toward the workshop to warn Serena. The hunters were still far enough away that they hadn't spotted the structure yet, but they were definitely tracking something, likely following signs of wolf activity that led directly to where Luna, Willow, and their cubs had taken refuge. Inside the workshop, Serena had already sensed the danger. She stood by the window, Zoe securely strapped to her chest in a baby carrier, her expression tense as Jack entered. "Hunters," he confirmed before she could ask. "Same ones from last night. They're tracking the wolves. We need to call fish and wildlife," Serena said immediately, reaching for her phone. "They're trespassing and hunting out of season. That's enough to have them arrested." Jack shook his head. "No signal, remember? The storm took down the towers, and there's no time to get back to the satellite phone in the cabin." He checked his rifle again. Decision made. "I'll intercept them before they get close enough to see the workshop. Convince them to leave, Jack." Serena's voice held concern rather than protest. She understood the situation as well as he did. These men had already proven themselves willing to break hunting laws. Confronting them carried risk. The pack. "Males are out there," Jack told her, voice low and steady. "At least 3 that I saw. They've formed a perimeter around the property. They're protecting their own." Luna and Willow had positioned themselves near the door, their postures communicating. Alertness rather than fear. They seemed to understand exactly what was happening, that their pursuers had returned, the danger approached their sanctuary. The cubs remained hidden beneath the workbench, silent and still in a way that spoke of instinctive response to a threat. "Be careful," Serena said simply, moving to stand beside the female wolves. "These men have already shown they don't respect laws or wildlife. I doubt they'll have much concern for a property owner asking them to leave." Jack nodded, the calm clarity of combat readiness settling over him. "Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me." He touched Zoe's head gently, then met Serena's eyes. "If anything happens, get to the cabin. Use the satellite phone to call for help." He slipped outside, moving quickly through the melting snow toward the approach path the hunters were taking. The tactical situation was clear in his mind. Intercept them far enough from the workshop that they wouldn't realize wolves were sheltering there, convince them to leave by whatever means necessary. The black alpha wolf shadowed Jack's movement, keeping pace through the trees to his right. The animal's presence was oddly comforting, like having a fellow soldier watching his flank. Jack found himself instinctively adjusting his approach to coordinate with the wolf, maintaining visual awareness of the predator's position while focusing on the human threat ahead. He intercepted the hunters near the property boundary, stepping out from behind a massive pine tree just as they prepared to cross onto Mercer land. The men startled, rifles half raised before recognition dawned. "You again," the taller hunter said, lowering his weapon slightly but keeping it ready. "Told you this wasn't over." Jack kept his own rifle pointed downward but ready to raise if needed. "And I told you this is private property. You're trespassing and hunting out of season." The shorter hunter spat into the snow, his expression contemptuous. "Got reports of problem wolves in this area, attacking livestock. We're doing a public service." "There haven't been any livestock attacks reported." "Within 50 miles, Jack countered calmly. "I checked with Fish and Wildlife this morning. You're lying and we both know it." The men exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. The taller one took a half step forward, his body language shifting subtly toward aggression. "Look, we tracked a wounded wolf to this area, probably suffering. Most humane thing would be to put it down." "After you shot it in the first place," Jack noted, his voice hardening. "I've already reported your illegal hunting activities. Game wardens are on their way. Best thing for you would be to clear out before they arrive." It was a bluff. With communication still compromised from the storm, he hadn't been able to follow up on his earlier report, but the hunters wouldn't know that. The shorter man's hand tightened on his rifle. "You threatening us, cripple?" Jack smiled thinly, unmoved by the attempted insult. "Not threatening, just stating facts. You're trespassing on a combat veteran's property while committing wildlife crimes I've already documented and reported. How do you think that ends?" Before either hunter could respond, a low growl emerged from the trees to their right. The alpha wolf stepped partially into view, its massive form unmistakable even in the dappled forest light. The hunters froze, their attention instantly diverted to the predator. "Jesus Christ," the taller one breathed, raising his rifle toward the animal. "I wouldn't," Jack advised, his own weapon now lifted slightly. He's not alone. As if on cue, more wolves appeared at the forest's edges, at least 5 adults forming a loose semicircle around the hunters, golden eyes fixed on the intruders with predatory focus. It was a display of coordinated strategic positioning that Jack found impressive on a professional level. "This is a protected pack," he continued, allowing the hunters' fear to build. "Tagged and monitored by Montana Fish and Wildlife. Shooting one would be a federal offense, 5 years minimum." Another bluff, but an effective one. The wolves maintained their positions, neither advancing nor retreating, creating a psychological pressure that Jack could see affecting the hunters. Their confident aggression had evaporated, replaced by the primal fear of being surrounded by apex predators. "You're out of your league here," Jack said quietly. "These wolves have claimed this territory. I respect that claim. You should too." The shorter hunter took a step backward, his earlier bravado replaced by evident fear. "This ain't natural. Wolves don't behave like this." "These ones do," Jack replied simply, "and they're under protection, mine and the state's. So I suggest you leave while that's still an option." The men retreated slowly, keeping their rifles ready as they backed away from the property line. The wolves made no move to pursue, maintaining their positions until the hunters had disappeared back into the forest. Only then did they melt away into the trees, returning to their patrol perimeter with silent efficiency. All except the alpha, male. The massive black wolf remained partly visible, its golden eyes fixed on Jack with an intensity that communicated something beyond animal awareness. Recognition, perhaps, or acknowledgement. One protector to another. "Thank you," Jack said quietly, feeling slightly foolish for speaking to a wild animal, yet somehow certain the wolf understood the sentiment behind the words. The alpha male held his gaze for a moment longer, then disappeared into the forest with remarkable stealth for such a large creature. Jack waited, listening intently until he heard the distant sound of a snowmobile engine starting up. The hunters were leaving, for now at least. He returned to the workshop, where Serena waited, anxiously by the door. Luna and Willow remained alert but calmer now, sensing the immediate threat had passed. "They're gone," Jack confirmed, securing his rifle as he entered. "The pack helped convince them it wasn't worth pursuing." Serena's eyes widened. "The males showed themselves deliberately?" "Very deliberately," Jack confirmed, the tactical significance still impressive to him. They surrounded the hunters in a coordinated display, not attacking, not threatening directly, just making their presence known in a way that couldn't be ignored. "Strategic intimidation," Serena murmured, her scientific mind processing the implications. "That's extraordinary. Wild wolves typically avoid human confrontation at all costs." "These aren't typical wolves," Jack reminded her, moving to check on Zoe, who had remained asleep throughout the encounter. "They're protecting their territory, and apparently that territory now includes us." Luna approached Jack, sniffing his clothing carefully as if checking for signs of threat or injury. Satisfied, she returned to her cubs, gathering them from beneath the workbench with gentle nuzzles and soft vocalizations. The wolf's behavior struck Jack as remarkably similar to how he'd seen Serena check Zoe after even minor concerns. That universal parental instinct to verify a child's safety personally. The alpha male, Jack said, watching Luna settle her cubs. He coordinated the others, positioned them strategically, almost like a military commander. Serena finished, understanding immediately. Wolves have complex social hierarchies and coordinated hunting strategies. In many ways, their pack structure resembles human military units. Jack nodded, finding the comparison apt. He held position until he confirmed the threat was neutralized, maintained visual contact with me throughout the operation. It was like having tactical support from a trained unit. He shook his head, still processing the experience. I've worked with military dogs, but this was different. These wolves weren't responding to commands, they were strategizing. Serena returned to her laptop, adding these new observations to her growing documentation. The implications are staggering. Jack, this level of apparent cooperation between wolves and humans, this strategic coordination without training or conditioning, it contradicts everything we thought we knew about wolf cognition and behavior. Outside, the afternoon sun continued to melt the ice, water dripping from the workshop eaves in a gentle percussion. The immediate danger had passed, but Jack knew the hunters might return, possibly with reinforcements. And Dr. Harmon's team would arrive soon, bringing a different kind of challenge: how to explain the extraordinary bond that had formed between their family and these wolves who had sought their help in desperate circumstances. Luna watched, Jack from her position near her cubs, her amber eyes communicating an awareness that transcended species boundaries. She seemed to understand exactly what had transpired outside. That Jack had defended her family as she would have done, that they had formed an alliance based on mutual protection and respect. We should prepare for Harmon's arrival, Serena said, checking the time. They'll likely reach us within a few hours if the road clearing continues at this pace. Jack nodded, already mentally planning how to present their extraordinary situation to the wildlife biologist. Conventional conservation protocols wouldn't apply here, not with wolves that had demonstrated this level of intelligence, communication, and strategic cooperation with humans. We need to make him understand that these aren't just injured wolves needing rehabilitation, Jack said, watching as Willow carefully groomed one of her cubs. They sought us out specifically. There, the sound of approaching vehicles reached their ears first, the distinctive rumble of heavy-duty engines negotiating the recently plowed access road. Dr. Harmon's team had arrived sooner than expected, likely having secured priority clearance from county road crews due to the unusual wildlife situation. Jack watched through the workshop window as two white trucks emblazoned with the Wolf Conservation Center logo pulled into the clearing in front of their cabin. "They're here," he called softly to Serena, who was administering another round of antibiotics to Scout's infected eye. The cub had shown remarkable improvement since the previous night. The swelling reduced significantly, but still required consistent treatment. Luna and Willow had detected the approaching vehicles long before. The humans heard them. Both mothers had positioned themselves protectively near their cubs, bodies alert but not aggressive, seemingly aware that a new phase of their unusual situation was beginning. "We should meet them at the cabin," Serena decided, carefully finishing Scout's treatment before standing. "Better to explain the situation before bringing them here." Jack nodded in agreement. The wolves seemed calm for now, but strangers entering their space might change that. "I'll go first, brief Harmon, then bring him back if he's open to what we've discovered." Serena gathered her documentation, the laptop filled with detailed behavioral notes, her phone containing dozens of photographs and videos of interactions that defied conventional understanding of wolf behavior. I'm coming with you. They'll need to hear this from both of us. Luna approached as they prepared to leave, her amber eyes moving between the humans and the door, clearly understanding that something significant was occurring. She made a soft sound in her throat. Not quite. A whine, not quite a growl, then deliberately moved to position herself between the entrance and where Zoe lay sleeping in her makeshift bed. I think she's offering to watch over Zoe, Serena said. Her voice hushed with wonder, despite the hours they'd spent observing the wolves' remarkable behaviors. Jack hesitated, parental instinct warring with the evidence of trust the wolves had demonstrated throughout their extraordinary encounter. Are you sure it's safe to leave her? Serena studied Luna's posture, her scientific training engaging alongside maternal intuition. Look at her body language. She's not just positioning herself randomly. She's deliberately assuming a protective stance relative to Zoe's position. She touched Jack's arm gently. We'll only be gone a few minutes and the cabin is visible from here. The decision made, they exited the workshop, leaving the door slightly ajar to allow air circulation, while ensuring none of the wolves could accidentally close themselves in. Jack's military-trained situational awareness remained active, scanning the perimeter as they crossed the 50 yards to the main cabin. The pack males who had helped drive off the hunters earlier remained invisible among the trees, but Jack sensed their continued vigilance. Dr. Everett Harmon had already exited the lead vehicle, a tall, lean man in his 60s with snow-white hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent most of his life outdoors. His expression registered recognition as Jack and Serena approached. They had met previously at wildlife conservation fundraisers, where Serena had presented her research. Serena, Jack, he greeted them, extending a gloved hand. Extraordinary situation you've described. Is your daughter safe? Zoe's fine, Serena assured him, accepting the handshake. In fact, that's part of what we need to discuss before you see the wolves. They're exhibiting behaviors that challenge everything we understand about wolf-human interactions. Harmon's bushy white eyebrows rose slightly, professional interest engaged. Behind him, 3 team members, 2 women and a man, were unloading equipment from the trucks, preparing for standard wildlife rescue operations. Let's talk inside, Jack suggested, leading the way into the cabin. The contrast between the warm interior and the melting snow outside created momentary condensation on their glasses as they entered. Once settled in the living room, Serena opened her laptop while Jack prepared coffee for everyone. Before we show you the females and cubs, you need to understand what we've been experiencing, she began, turning the screen toward Harmon. These aren't typical injured wolves seeking shelter from a storm. They approached our cabin deliberately, specifically seeking human assistance. Harmon leaned forward, professional skepticism evident in his expression, despite his obvious respect for Serena's scientific credentials. Wolves don't seek human help, Serena. You know that better than most. Even socialized wolves maintain wariness of humans outside their immediate handlers. That's exactly why this is so unprecedented, Serena agreed, navigating to video clips she had captured. Watch this first interaction when Luna, the larger female, deliberately presented her wounded cub to us, then physically backed away to allow treatment. For the next 15 minutes, Serena methodically presented their documentation, the videos of Luna's gentle communication with Zoe, the coordinated protection strategies of the mother wolves, the remarkable trust they had established in less than 24 hours. Jack added details of the pack male's strategic coordination during the confrontation with the hunters, describing tactical behaviors that went far beyond instinctive reactions. Harmon's expression transformed gradually from professional skepticism to focused attention and finally to undisguised amazement. "If I weren't seeing this with my own eyes," he murmured, studying footage of Luna's melodic vocalization that had calmed Zoe the previous night. This contradicts everything we know about wild wolf behavior toward humans, especially human infants. And that's just what we've managed to document, Jack added, distributing coffee mugs to everyone. They appear to understand human conversation, not just tone or basic commands, but context and meaning. Luna responds differently when we discuss the hunters versus when we talk about treating her cubs. She recognizes specific words. Harmon set his coffee down untouched, his focus completely captured by the implications of what he was witnessing. You realize what you're describing would fundamentally change our understanding of wolf cognition, communication, and social behaviors. He looked up at them, professional excitement breaking through his scientific reserve. If verified through further observation, this could be the most significant wolf behavior discovery in decades, which is why standard wildlife rehabilitation protocols won't be appropriate here, Serena said firmly, reaching the critical point of their discussion. These wolves haven't just stumbled into human contact by accident. They've deliberately initiated a complex interspecies relationship based on mutual need and protection. Harmon nodded slowly, processing the implications. You're suggesting we shouldn't remove them to the rehabilitation facility? Not immediately, at least, Jack confirmed. The mothers are recovering well. The pack males have established a protective perimeter around our property, and they're demonstrating behaviors that deserve further scientific study in the context where they've emerged. The wildlife biologist ran a hand through his white hair, clearly weighing competing professional obligations. The standard protocols for injured wildlife versus the unprecedented research opportunity before him. I'd need to examine them personally before making any determinations. My team is prepared for standard field medical assessment. We can arrange that, Serena agreed, but there's something else you should know. She exchanged glances with Jack before continuing. The illegal hunters who injured Luna and trapped Willow returned a few hours ago. They were driven off by the pack males working in coordination with Jack, but they may come back. These wolves aren't just seeking medical help, they're seeking protection from human predators. Harmon's expression hardened. I've brought a Fish and Wildlife Enforcement officer with us. Once he documents the evidence of illegal hunting, he can issue an emergency protective order for this area. He stood, decision apparently made. Let's meet these remarkable wolves of yours, but we'll proceed with extreme caution. No matter how cooperative they've been with you, introducing strangers will test whatever trust has been established. They exited the cabin and assembled the team for a briefing before approaching the workshop. Harmon's crew consisted of Dr. Melissa Chen, a veterinarian specializing in predator medicine, Ryan Blackwood, a wolf behavior researcher, Alison Takoda, a wildlife rehabilitation specialist, and Michael Craig, the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement officer. Each listened with professional attention as Serena explained the extraordinary situation. Awaiting them, we'll approach in pairs, Harmon decided after the briefing. Serena and I first, then Jack with Dr. Chen if the mothers remain calm. The rest of you maintain distance until we've established that it's safe to proceed with examinations. As they approached the workshop, Jack noticed the black alpha male had reappeared at the forest's edge, watching the procession of humans with evident assessment. Two other adult males flanked him at a distance, positioned to observe without being immediately visible to anyone not specifically looking for them. The pack males are monitoring us, Jack murmured to Harmon, nodding discreetly toward the tree line. They've maintained a security perimeter since this morning. Harmon followed his gaze, his experienced eyes quickly locating the nearly invisible wolves. Remarkable positioning, he observed. Almost like sentries. Exactly like sentries, Jack confirmed. Their tactical awareness is unlike anything I've seen outside military operations. They reached the workshop door, which remained slightly ajar as they had left it. Serena paused, speaking softly to Harmon. Let me enter first. Luna and Willow know me, and they'll be wary of strangers. She pushed the door open gently, calling softly as she entered. We're back, and we've brought someone who can help your cubs even more. Her voice maintained the calm, gentle tone she had used consistently with the wolves since their arrival. Jack followed a few steps behind with Harmon, allowing Serena to establish the initial context for the newcomer's presence. Inside the workshop, the scene had changed slightly during their absence. Luna had positioned herself directly beside Zoe's makeshift bed, her large body forming a protective barrier between the door and the still sleeping infant. Willow had gathered all the cubs, both hers and Luna's, into a group near the wood stove, where they rested in a pile of mingled grey and tawny fur. Harmon froze just inside the doorway, his decades of wildlife experience not preparing him for the tableau before him. Wild wolves arranging themselves in protective formation around a human baby, their posture alert but not aggressive as the humans entered. "Remarkable," he breathed, maintaining his position while Serena moved toward Luna with practiced familiarity. "Luna, this is Dr. Harmon," Serena explained, using the same conversational tone she might use introducing a friend to a family member. "He's here to help make sure you and your cubs are healthy." The large wolf's amber eyes fixed on Harmon, assessing this newcomer with evident intelligence. Her ears swiveled forward, focused on his presence, but she made no aggressive movement. After a moment of apparent consideration, she shifted slightly to allow Serena closer access to Zoe, though she remained protectively positioned. "She's allowing proximity but maintaining protective monitoring," Harmon observed quietly, his scientist's objectivity momentarily overcome by wonder. "The positioning is deliberate, not coincidental." Jack nodded, moving slowly to check on Zoe, who had begun to stir. Luna has been particularly focused on Zoe since their first interaction. She seems to recognize her as a vulnerable infant requiring protection, similar to her own cubs. As Jack gently lifted his daughter from her makeshift bed, Luna rose to her feet, watching intently but without aggression. The wolf followed as Jack carried Zoe to where Serena stood with Harmon, maintaining a consistent distance that suggested deliberate social spacing rather than fear or aggression. "I've never seen anything like this," Harmon admitted, his voice hushed as he observed the wolf's careful monitoring of the human infant. "This level of apparent cross-species recognition and protective behavior, it's unprecedented in documented wolf studies." Serena nodded toward where Willow had begun to approach, having left her cubs momentarily to investigate the newcomer. Both mothers have demonstrated remarkable awareness of human social cues, intentional communication attempts, and strategic cooperation. And the pack males outside have coordinated defense of the property in ways that suggest complex planning rather than instinctive response. Harmon watched as Willow cautiously circled him, sniffing occasionally before retreating to her cubs. "You've documented all these interactions?" "Everything," Serena confirmed. "Every unusual vocalization, every apparent response to human speech, every interaction with Zoe. The data strongly suggests these wolves are demonstrating cognitive abilities and social awareness far beyond what conventional research recognizes in wild wolf populations." Outside the workshop, the black alpha male had moved closer, now visible through the window as he maintained his vigilant watch. Harmon noticed him immediately, professional interest engaged by the tactical positioning. "The Alpha has been maintaining perimeter security," Jack explained, recognizing the biologist's focused attention. Earlier today, he coordinated at least 5 other adult males to surround and intimidate the illegal hunters who were tracking Luna and Willow. The display was strategic, not aggressive, designed to create psychological pressure without initiating. Direct conflict, military-style containment tactics, Harmon murmured, clearly impressed. Wolves hunt cooperatively and defend territory as a unit, but this level of apparent strategic coordination with humans present. He shook his head slightly. Your background gives you unique perspective on this, Jack. Most wildlife biologists wouldn't recognize the tactical elements you're describing. Luna had returned to her cubs, who had begun to wake and explore their surroundings with increasing energy. Scout, the cub with the previously infected eye, approached the humans with cautious curiosity, stopping several feet away to observe. "These new visitors, may I?" Harmon asked, gesturing toward the cub. Serena nodded. "Move slowly, speak gently." Luna has been accepting of medical intervention when she understands it's to help her cubs. The wildlife biologist crouched down, lowering his towering frame to appear less threatening. "Hello there, little one," he said softly, extending his hand palm down in a non-threatening posture. "You've had quite an adventure, haven't you?" To everyone's surprise, Scout approached Harmon's outstretched hand, sniffing cautiously before allowing a gentle touch to his head. Luna watched from nearby, her posture communicating watchful assessment rather than concern. "The antibiotics have significantly reduced the infection," Serena noted, observing the interaction. "He was much worse last night. The eye was completely sealed shut with discharge." Harmon carefully examined the cub from his crouched position, his experienced gaze noting details of condition and behavior. "You've done remarkable work here," he acknowledged, glancing up at Serena and Jack, "both medically and in establishing this extraordinary level of trust." As if responding to his words, Luna approached, positioning herself beside her cub in a way that allowed the biologist to continue his examination while maintaining protective proximity. The message couldn't have been clearer if she had spoken. In human language, she was permitting this stranger's intervention because she recognized his healing intention. "I need to bring Dr. Chen in to perform proper medical assessments," Harmon said quietly, maintaining eye contact with Luna as he spoke, instinctively treating her as a sentient participant in the conversation rather than merely an animal being. "Disgust. Would that be acceptable to you, Jack?" Serena? Jack nodded, moving toward the door. "I'll brief her on approaching non-threateningly. Luna and Willow have been remarkably tolerant, but we shouldn't push boundaries with too many strangers at once." As Jack stepped outside to speak with the waiting team members, Harmon turned to Serena, his expression reflecting professional excitement, carefully balanced with scientific caution. "This changes everything we thought we knew about wolf-human interactions. If these behaviors can be properly documented and verified through continued observation, it will challenge fundamental assumptions about animal cognition, communication, and the boundaries between wild and domestic behaviors." Serena finished, watching as Luna guided Scout back toward his siblings with gentle nudges. "These wolves aren't just accepting human assistance out of desperation. They're actively engaging, communicating, forming social bonds that transcend species boundaries." Outside, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the melting snow as Jack briefed the remaining team members. In the forest beyond, the black alpha male maintained his vigilant watch, golden eyes tracking every movement around the property he had claimed as protected territory. A wild predator who had chosen, through mechanisms science had yet to fully understand, to form an alliance with humans who had shown compassion to his vulnerable pack members. Inside the workshop, a boundary that had separated two species for thousands of years continued to dissolve, not through domestication or captivity, but through mutual recognition of shared needs, shared vulnerabilities, and the universal drive to protect the young, that transcended the ancient divisions between human and wild. Over the next several hours, Dr. Harmon's team worked methodically, establishing a careful protocol that respected the wolves' unusual behavior while conducting thorough medical assessments. Dr. Chen examined each cub individually, her gentle hands checking for signs of malnourishment, parasites, and developmental issues. Despite never having worked with wild wolves that accepted human contact, she quickly adapted her approach, speaking softly to the mothers while treating their young. Scout's eye infection is responding well to the antibiotics, she confirmed, to Serena, who assisted with each examination. And the wound on Willow's paw is healing cleanly. No signs of deep tissue infection. You did excellent field treatment. Luna and Willow observed the proceedings with remarkable patience, occasionally approaching to check on their cubs, but never showing aggression toward the strangers handling their young. Their behavior continued to defy conventional understanding of wild predators, particularly mothers with vulnerable offspring. Their trust extends beyond just you and Jack, Harmon noted, watching as Willow allowed Dr. Chen to check her healing paw wound. They seem to recognize that everyone here has healing intentions. Jack, who had remained near the entrance monitoring both the activity inside and the pack males still maintaining their perimeter outside, nodded in agreement. They've demonstrated remarkable discernment. The hunters this morning triggered immediate defensive positioning. Your team is getting a completely different response. Michael Craig, the Fish and Wildlife Enforcement Officer, had been meticulously documenting the wolves' injuries as evidence of illegal hunting activities. He photographed Luna's healing bullet wound, Willow's trap injury, and collected samples for forensic analysis, including the bullet fragments Serena had extracted. This is more than enough for an emergency protection order, he told Jack, his expression grim as he catalogued the evidence. And once we identify the specific hunters based on your descriptions and the vehicle information, we can pursue criminal charges for multiple violations. As the medical assessments continued, Ryan Blackwood, the wolf behavior researcher, methodically recorded every interaction, his expression growing increasingly amazed as he observed behaviors that contradicted established understanding of wolf cognition and social dynamics. The vocalizations Luna uses with your daughter, he said to Serena during a brief break. They're unlike anything documented in wild wolf communication patterns. It's almost as if she's developed a specific language just for interacting with Zoe. Serena nodded, having noticed the same phenomenon. It's not just random sounds. There's pattern and apparent intention. She uses different vocalizations when trying to soothe Zoe versus when she seems to be communicating information to her. Blackwood shook his head in wonder. This could revolutionize our understanding of wolf communication capabilities. If they can adapt vocalization specifically for cross-species interaction, the possibility hung in the air, too extraordinary to fully articulate, yet supported by the evidence unfolding before their eyes. These wolves weren't merely tolerating human presence or accepting assistance out of desperation. They were actively engaging, communicating, forming social connections that transcended the conventional boundaries between wild and domestic. As evening approached, bringing with it the golden light of sunset filtering through the workshop windows, Dr. Harmon gathered his team for consultation. The wolves had settled into a resting pattern, the cubs playing quietly near their mothers, while the humans discussed their findings in hushed tones. Medically, they're all recovering well, Dr. Chen reported. The cubs show signs of previous malnourishment, but none are currently in critical condition. With proper nutrition and continued treatment of the minor infections, they should make full recoveries. Harmon nodded, turning to Craig. The protection order? Already processed, the enforcement officer confirmed. I've submitted the documentation, electronically with emergency priority. This entire property, plus a 5-mile radius, is now under temporary wildlife protection status. No hunting of any kind permitted, and Fish and Wildlife will increase patrols in the area starting tomorrow. And the behavioral observations? Harmon asked, looking toward Blackwood. The researcher gestured helplessly, as if words failed to encompass what they had witnessed. Dr. Harmon, in 20 years of studying wolf behavior, I've never seen anything approaching this level of cross-species social engagement, communication attempts, or apparent recognition of human intention. If we publish based on today's observations alone, we risk professional skepticism. We need continued documentation, multiple observers, controlled conditions to verify what we're seeing. Which brings us to the critical question, Harmon said, turning to Jack and Serena. Standard protocol would have us transport these wolves to the rehabilitation facility, but I think we all recognize this situation is far from standard. Jack had been formulating a proposal since the team's arrival, discussing it in quiet moments with Serena between examinations. "We have a suggestion," he said, meeting Harmon's gaze directly. "The workshop is suitable for short-term recovery, but not ideal for extended observation. We'd like to convert our property's old barn into a proper recovery and research facility. It would provide more space for the wolves while allowing continued scientific observation of these unprecedented behaviors." "A field research station?" Harmon considered, stroking his white beard thoughtfully. "The barn is approximately 100 yards from our cabin," Serena added. "It's weathertight, with electricity and running water already installed. Jack was converting it into a larger workshop before Zoe was born. With some modifications, it could serve as both recovery space for the wolves and a proper research facility." Harmon exchanged glances with his team members, professional interest clearly engaged. "The university would need to approve funding for equipment and personnel. We'd need proper documentation protocols, consistent observation schedules." "I've already drafted a preliminary research proposal," Serena said, opening her laptop to display the document she had been developing throughout the day between assisting with examinations. Focused on cross-species communication patterns, cognitive recognition capabilities, and social bonding behaviors. The unprecedented nature of these observations justifies emergency funding approval. Blackwood moved to read over her shoulder, his expression brightening with scientific excitement. "This is excellent framework. If we combine this with today's preliminary observations..." He looked up at Harmon. "Everett, this could be the most significant wolf behavior study of the decade, of the century, potentially," Harmon corrected, his scientific caution temporarily overcome by the extraordinary opportunity before them. "If these behaviors can be properly documented, verified, and analyzed..." He hesitated, looking toward the resting wolves. "But what about the pack males? They've remained wild, maintaining territory boundaries rather than seeking direct human interaction." Jack had been considering this aspect as well. "The property borders national forest land that's already protected from hunting. If the emergency protection order extends the no-hunting zone, the pack could maintain its territory while the recovering members remain under observation. It's the best of both worlds. Protection for the entire pack with research access to those members who have initiated human contact." The discussion continued as night fell. The practical details of converting the barn into a research facility, blending with scientific protocols for documenting the wolves' unprecedented behaviors. Throughout the conversation, Luna and Willow remained attentive, their intelligent eyes tracking the humans' movements with evident understanding that their fate was being determined. At one point, Zoe began fussing, hungry for her evening feeding. Without prompting, Luna approached Jack, making that same soft melodic sound that had soothed the baby the previous night. The entire research team fell silent, watching in amazement as the wild predator deliberately attempted to comfort the human infant. "Document everything," Harmon whispered as Blackwood frantically adjusted camera settings to capture the interaction in the fading light. "Everything." As Jack prepared Zoe's bottle, Luna remained nearby, her amber eyes focused on the baby with what could only be described as concern. When Jack settled with Zoe to feed her, the wolf positioned herself beside them, her large body a protective presence that seemed entirely natural despite defying every conventional understanding of wolf behavior toward human infants. "I've made my decision," Harmon announced quietly. "Watching this extraordinary tableau, we'll establish a field research station here. These behaviors deserve proper scientific documentation in their natural context, not disruption through relocation." The relief on Serena's face was evident, though her scientific training maintained professional objectivity in her response. "We'll need to establish clear research parameters, consistent observation protocols, controlled variables to ensure the data is scientifically valid." "All of that, yes," Harmon agreed, his gaze still fixed on Luna's gentle attentiveness to Zoe. "But also something more, something most wildlife research fails to capture." He gestured toward the scene before them. The emotional intelligence component, the apparent recognition of shared vulnerability across species boundaries. These wolves aren't just exhibiting unusual behaviors, they're demonstrating capacities we've systematically underestimated in wild predators. As the conversation turned to logistics, equipment needs, personnel scheduling, research focus areas, the black alpha male appeared at the window, his massive form silhouetted against the darkening sky. Unlike earlier when he had maintained a careful distance, he now pressed closer, his breath fogging the glass as he observed the proceedings within. Jack noticed him first, nudging Harmon, who turned with sudden attention. "That's the pack leader," Jack explained softly. "He's been maintaining perimeter security all day, but this is the closest he's approached the structure." The alpha's golden eyes seemed to meet Harmon's directly through the glass, an assessment passing between predator and biologist that transcended their separate worlds. After a long moment, the massive wolf turned away, moving with deliberate pace toward the forest edge, where he stood clearly visible in the last light of day, his posture communicating neither threat nor submission, but something more complex. Acknowledgement, perhaps, or recognition of a new reality taking shape on his territory. "He's accepting our presence," Harmon murmured, understanding the significance of the display, not just tolerating it, acknowledging it. As darkness fell completely, transforming the workshop windows into black mirrors, reflecting the humans and wolves within, Luna approached Serena, who sat documenting the day's events on her laptop. The wolf paused beside her, then deliberately pressed her massive head against Serena's arm, a gesture so reminiscent of domestic dogs seeking affection that it momentarily blurred the distinction between wild and tame. Serena hesitated, then gently placed her hand on Luna's head, the physical contact bridging thousands of years of separation between their species. "Thank you for trusting us," she said softly, speaking directly to the wolf as naturally as she would to a human capable of understanding her words. Luna held the contact for several heartbeats, her amber eyes conveying something beyond human language before she withdrew, returning to her cubs who had settled into sleep near the wood stove. The moment lingered in the room, witnessed by scientists trained to maintain objective distance, yet undeniably moved by its profound simplicity. "We need to establish sleeping arrangements," Dr. Chen said finally, breaking the reverent silence. "Some of us should remain overnight to monitor the wolves, especially the cubs still receiving medication." "I'll stay," Blackwood volunteered immediately, his researcher's enthusiasm evident. "The opportunity to observe their nocturnal behaviors, especially after today's human interactions." Harmon nodded, making quick decisions. "Ryan and I will remain tonight. Dr. Chen, you and Officer Craig return to town, secure the emergency equipment we'll need, and begin the official paperwork for establishing the research station. We'll rotate observation shifts starting tomorrow once we have proper facilities in place." As the team sorted logistics, Jack checked his watch, calculating how long the road would remain passable before overnight temperatures turned the melting snow to treacherous ice. "Anyone leaving should go soon," he advised. "The mountain passes freeze quickly after sunset this time of year." While Chen and Craig gathered their equipment to depart, Harmon pulled Jack and Serena aside, his expression serious despite the scientific excitement of the day. "You understand what you're committing to here," he said quietly. "This won't be a short-term project. These wolves have formed connections with your family specifically. The research value is extraordinary, but it will impact your lives significantly." Serena glanced toward Luna, who had settled protectively around her sleeping cubs. "They came to us for help when they had nowhere else to turn. We can't abandon them now that they've begun to trust us." Jack nodded in agreement, his military background informing his perspective. "They've already demonstrated their willingness to protect our family. This isn't just about research. It's about recognizing and respecting an alliance that formed naturally." Harmon studied them both, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. "That's precisely why this location is ideal for the research station. The connection isn't just between humans and wolves in the abstract. It's between specific wolves and specific humans who recognize each other as individuals." He glanced toward where Zoe had fallen asleep in her makeshift bed, Luna positioned nearby in what had become her customary protective stance. "And that includes your daughter. These wolves seem to recognize her as someone deserving special protection." The observation hung in the air, its implications profound for both scientific understanding and the Mercer family's future. This extraordinary encounter had initiated a relationship that would inevitably reshape their lives, connecting them to the wolves through bonds of mutual protection and recognition that transcended conventional understanding of human-wildlife interactions. Outside, the black alpha male's howl cut through the night. Not a hunting call or territorial warning, but something else. A communication to distant pack members, perhaps, or an acknowledgement of changing circumstances on his territory. Within seconds, Luna and Willow lifted their heads, listening intently, but making no responsive sounds of their own. "They're communicating," Blackwood whispered, frantically documenting the behavior. "Coordinating across distance." In that moment, as humans observed wolves observing humans, the ancient boundary between their worlds continued its gradual dissolution, not through domestication or captivity, but through mutual recognition of intelligence, intention, and the universal drive to protect vulnerable young that connected their species across millennia of separation. In the months that followed, the Mercer property was transformed. The barn became a state-of-the-art research facility, documenting the extraordinary relationship between the wolves and the human family. Luna and Willow's cubs thrived, growing strong under the watchful eyes of both their mothers and the human researchers. The black alpha male, eventually named Shadow by Zoe, who had begun speaking her first words, gradually accepted limited human contact, though he maintained his wild independence. Under the protection order, the entire pack flourished, the territory around the Mercer home becoming a sanctuary where an unprecedented alliance between species continued to evolve. Most remarkable was Zoe's bond with Luna. As the child grew, from infant to toddler, the wolf remained her constant guardian, the two developing a communication system of gestures and sounds that astounded the research team. They documented over 30 distinct vocalizations Luna used specifically with Zoe, a language developed between species that science had never imagined possible. The hunters were prosecuted, their actions leading to stricter anti-poaching laws throughout the state. More importantly, video documentation of the wolves' intelligence and emotional capacity transformed public understanding, leading to stronger conservation measures nationwide. On Zoe's second birthday, as she toddled across the yard under Luna's watchful eye, Serena captured a photo that would eventually grace the cover of National Geographic, a moment of connection between child and wolf that spoke to the possibility of harmony between worlds long divided. If this extraordinary tale of connection across species touched your heart, please subscribe for more incredible stories that change how we see the wild creatures who share our world. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from.